when we talk about the war of talent, it will not disappear. I think it will be even more difficult in how to attract and retain the best people. And I think a lot of the best people will probably, by choice, want to be gig workers.
Happy New Year, and welcome to Gigging, Everything in the Sharing Economy, the podcast where entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, market makers, and market leaders come to predict the future of the gig, sharing, and platform economies. Welcome to episode 34, our first show of 2021, and we have a great one in store for you. Miss Marianne Olson, super gig consultant, is going to tell you how to succeed in the gig, sharing, and platform economies. And when we're done with that, we're going to predict the future. So here is my interview with Miss Marianne Olson. Welcome back to the podcast. We have another very exciting show for you today. Guys, I tell you, every week we talk to the leading experts, the founders, the CEOs. We bring market makers and market leaders in here to tell you about the future of the gig, sharing, and platform economies. And today is no different. We have for you an advisor, a speaker, an author in Marianne Olson, who's going to talk to us today about the future of the gig economy. And we're also going to get a chance to talk a little bit about her books that are going to help you learn how to consult and get a job in the gig economy. But before we jump into the show, let me give you a little bit of background on her. As I mentioned, she's an advisor, a speaker, and an author at consultboken.se. Now, she told me that means the book of consulting in Swedish, which I thought was very cool. She has 20 years in the consulting industry and is a pioneer in writing about the gig economy. She has an MBA in general management from the Henley Business School in the UK, and she's the author of several books, two of which we're going to really dig into today. Working in the Gig Economy, How to Get Great Gigs, the Global Edition, and Consulting to the Gig Economy, How to Get Great Gigs. That's also a global edition, which I was so happy to find because a listener of the show wrote in this week and asked, recommend a couple of good books about the gig economy that I can read. And I was more than happy to pass these two along as great books that he could dig into. Welcome to the podcast, Ms. Olson.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Before we move in any deeper, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What got you so excited to spend 20 years in the consulting space and to be an expert in this new and emerging gig economy?
Well, I guess in brief, almost 20 years ago to date, I had to reinvent myself. There was a financial crisis, and I ended up starting my own business as a management consultant. And I was really curious about what are the driving forces behind, making sure that you have work, providing it for yourself, and so on. And so while I was doing my MBA, I did a master thesis about what are the key success factors in that space. So that was sort of the inspiration to writing management books. It wasn't something I planned. So I'm an accidental author, and I did not plan to write all these books. But I realized that I had some knowledge I wanted to share. And so that was a starting point for me. So I guess that would be my short answer.
Excellent. Now, set the table for the audience. You're not in the UK. You are an expert in the gig economy. Lay out what the gig economy is like in your country, and then, take us through how that economic collapse helped the creation or the growth of the gig economy in your neck of the woods.
All right. So I'm based in Sweden, and I guess what is really exciting about the gig economy is that it's global. I mean, if you do remote work, and if you're like a white collar freelancer, basically you can do work for any company across the world, which I think is super exciting. So the geographic location becomes less and less important. But if you talk about the sharing economy and different other kinds of gig work, then of course geography counts, because you can only deliver in the vicinity of your neck of the woods, right? So it varies a lot. So I would say that in Sweden, since you were asking for like a local comment, I would say that since the COVID situation has pushed more and more people into maybe like an insecure space. Some lost their jobs and others have maybe switched industries and moved between these two economies, which are now encompassed as one, because gig and sharing is now the same thing. And you have like IT and management consultants that lost maybe their long-term contracts, and some of them went into carpenting and handyman jobs, and people are like moving between these spaces, which is super interesting. And so what I see in my own market is that there's a combination of, I guess, working across that value chain, so to speak, which I think is super exciting in a way. And also there are lots of like ideas about who are actually doing the delivery gigs, for example. And in the Stockholm area, which is the capital of Sweden, you have a lot of foreign students who are actually doing the food deliveries. So you see a lot of like Pakistani students who are actually getting a technical degree in Sweden. And since they don't have a network, they're happy to do a job that doesn't require a personal network, if you make a comparison. And maybe by showing that initiative, it will be easier for them to get a white collar job next time they apply for that as a student, for example. So I think a lot of interesting things are happening in this space. And I think more and more people realize that in this job market we now call the gig economy, actually everyone's a part of it. They just don't know about it yet. I know it's really challenging to say that, but a lot of people think they have job security. But when we had this crisis come upon us, in a sense, there were so many industries that thought that they were like safe, but they were not. So I think the old view on what a steady job is and what kind of security you thought you had is maybe something of the past.
Yeah, I see that as well. I think you're absolutely right. The pandemic has put a certain amount of stress on the traditional economy, forcing people to consider other options. And what's interesting to me is that you're right, it's making people highlight other skill sets that they have. Some of those skills aren't necessarily certified by your traditional education institutions. Like you said, people are going out and showing their carpentry skills, their welding skills, their handyman skills. And these certifications are skill sets that they can get in 2 weeks, 3 weeks from different types of online courses that aren't taught at your traditional universities. So it's starting to remake so much of our economy and so much of our personal experience, because you can see someone with a PhD turn around and market their carpentry skills if they have the capacity and the need for more income. And so we're seeing that sort of impact. I think the other impact we're seeing in the gig economy is those companies you mentioned in those industries, they're really starting to buy in. You're seeing global companies acquire and or partner with many of these gig platforms in order to extend their own reach into this emerging new economy. Are you seeing that in Sweden as well?
Sure. And I think that a lot of companies, they come to realize that they can not afford not to. They need to be a part of it. And the faster they catch on, the bigger chance they have in beating their competition in whatever field they're in. So the more the merrier, I guess.
Right. I read an article a year or so ago that said that P&G, the Procter and Gamble, the big products company, was experimenting with gig type product management roles, short-term roles that were designed for this economy where people would work 3 months, 6 months on a particular project and then move on to a different role if necessary, or work for a different company. Do you see that emerging as a part of the economy, as a permanent part of the economy going forward?
Well, if assignment-based is what you're describing, assignment-based or project-based work, I think, yes, that is definitely the new way to go. And in big companies, they can really apply this in their internal job market, because basically, if you work for an employer that employs several thousand of employees, I'm sure that you can rotate between divisions and so on. So that is also good for knowledge sharing, regardless of if this is happening inside a company or if they're using gig workers in that same sense. I have, for example, a projection, which is about, in the traditional companies, maybe 20% of the employees would be temps or consultants or freelancers or project-based employees. So I think that in the future to come, I think it will be the other way around. It will be 80% of the workforce in a specific company. And we already see that being applied among startups. And I know you know a lot of startups in the space, and they cannot afford to actually employ a lot of people, because then you have that salary cost, which is a fixed cost, but instead you can actually gain or sort of obtain knowledge from several different freelancers, instead of having like one generalist for marketing who is not like an expert on each and every task, but they can cope right in the role. Maybe they can be great as well, I'm sure, but it would be even smarter for a smaller company to have somebody who is great at SEO, another person who is the PR person, and so on. So maybe you just buy like 10 hours from each group, and then you have one person who sort of manages the whole team, who can also be a freelancer, gig worker, consultant, whatever label you prefer to use. So I think in some ways this is already happening, but the big companies, they have a really long and bumpy journey to adapt. So I think this will be easier to be applied in newly started ventures, of course, new companies, and of course, any startup or small company that can be flexible in terms of how they organize themselves.
I am 100% in agreement with what you're saying. We've had two CEOs on the podcast, Stephen Pockross and Manuel Sanchez, CEO of Verbillo and CEO of Unloya. Verbillo deals with all of the marketing, outsourcing your marketing and having just that type of specialization you mentioned, that you can buy it by the drink, you can buy it by the project, and have that be a defined fixed cost project and a set of defined tasks that once done, you can move on to the next set of experts within that organization.
Exactly. And also, since the external environment is changing so fast, and now that we are sort of, I know we're still in the midst of COVID, but we are, in a sense, we're in a post situation of the pandemic, because now it's the new normal, that there will be a new one. It will be called something else, maybe 18 or 20 or whatever. Or something totally new. So I think that a lot of companies have come to realize that they need to be able to adapt faster, and that way they will not be able to project what they need in 1 year from now. So why would you hire somebody permanently for a role that might get obsolete that fast? So this is a big challenge. When we talk about the war of talent, it will not disappear. I think it will be even more difficult in how to attract and retain the best people. And I think a lot of the best people will probably, by choice, want to be gig workers because then they can select what assignments they do and how they do them. Maybe they want to live in the countryside and do more remote work. So maybe they only travel 1 or 2 days a week, and then they can have a higher quality of life. So instead of living in the city, like a lot of people do in the Western countries, and which requires that you make so much money that you don't have time to spend time with family or kids, and you barely cope living. So maybe this is like a new shift that we're seeing.
With Manuel Sanchez and the platform and Lawyer, where lawyers are selling their service as a gig to potential buyers, one of the ahas that came out of that discussion is that lawyers now are changing the way they think about their education. Law school traditionally has been a place where you learn theory, but if gig-based work is the future of legal services, you're going to need more practical application. You're going to need to know how to apply the law, and you're not going to necessarily going to come out of law school looking to join a law firm. Like you say, more and more people want lifestyle in addition to challenging work. And what that really made me think about is, are we on this circle of life where we're going, where what was old is now new again? Because Abraham Lincoln, one of the presidents of the United States, he didn't go to law school. He apprenticed under a lawyer, learned how to apply the law, and then hung out his own shingle. I wonder if the world's going to come back to that type of a educational approach in order to produce the type of experts we need for the gig economy.
On the job training.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's what it was called.
Right, exactly, right? Right. And then all of a sudden that didn't make sense, but it's making sense now for Fortune 500s who are trying to apply the gig work, as well as these white collar services that are becoming more gig based. Now, you've actually written the book, speaking of gig workers, on how to help gig workers succeed. This world seems very confusing the way we just describe it. If you're going from one job to the next, if you may have a base set of skills that account for 80% of your time and a set of subordinate skills that may apply to the remaining 20%. What steps do gig workers take in order to succeed? Because that's one of your books. Working in the gig economy.
I guess if somebody would want to get started tomorrow, I guess my advice would be to first identify what is your niche competence, skill, or resource if you want to be in the sharing economy, because they're different. Of course, it's different depending on if you're like a freelancing consultant or if you want to share resources. If you want to be an Uber driver or if you want to share other things. So first of all, just identify what is your niche and what you're going to offer. And then after that, you need to identify where your marketplaces are. Where are you going to find the work? Or if you're sharing, where can you, where are the sharing capabilities, for example? So you need to do some research about what channels for your sales, basically. And that varies depending on which country you're at, naturally. But there are new companies when it comes to especially blue collar work. I would say that a company called AppJobs have been really smart about it because they are partnering with all these sharing companies so that any gig worker can work for different ones through their portal. So I think this is super interesting. But at the same time, if you're like a business consultant, you have a totally different way of going about it. And I think that the higher up the value chain you are, i.e. the more you want to charge for your services, I think you need to also consider your personal brand. But before we talk about personal branding, I also want to mention that when you've decided where you're going to market yourself, what you're going to offer, you need to get like references and referrals and ratings. So you want people who don't know you already to want to be working with you, right? To use your services, whatever they are. So if you are new to gig work, I would say to reach out to family and friends, which is like the strongest network you have if you don't have a network in your new space, to make sure that you get ratings. Have your family or friends order pizza if you're going to deliver pizza, and make sure that you get the gig. Or if you're working through like a handyman app, they're different all over the world, so I'm not going to name drop any of them. But for example, then you make sure that somebody will use your services, so you start to get your first rating. So I think this is an important part. It's sort of like having a CV, regardless of what kind of work you do. And then lastly, the personal brand is really important, because that is like your DNA in that space. So you need to think about that. And also make sure that whatever work you've done, especially if you're into freelancing, to always follow up with your customers and make sure that they're happy with the delivery that you've done. And also that's a smart way to also get a chance to maybe get a quote from them in terms of what their experience was working with you, for example.
That all makes very good sense. And I want to stress to the audience, this type of research is really necessary to differentiate yourself. In preparation for my current startup, I drove for a delivery service, and I took the exact same steps that Ms. Olson outlined here. I looked at the local market and saw that everyone that was delivering in my service area delivered using a car. And I said, well, what would happen if I delivered using a pickup truck? And knowing that I would have one of the very few pickup trucks in that service area opened me up for larger orders, different orders that weren't serviceable by cars. And I stayed busy the whole time. Got a lot of good research out of the work and learned a lot about their platform. But that research was the key to helping me figure out how I differentiate myself and get those early ratings to build up my gig CV. So you're
Exactly.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So when taking those steps, you mentioned personal branding and in connection to that CV. Let's drill down on that a little bit more. Help the audience understand why that's so important and how do they build that personal brand?
Well, I think that building the personal brand, I think, is important regardless of if you're a gig worker or not. Since I stated earlier in this discussion that everybody actually is a gig worker, but they don't know about it yet because it hasn't hit them or their industry yet, that they're not in a secure job, and they need to be more open about that maybe their steady job is just a long-term assignment they're on, for example. So this is to everyone who has a job, basically, this message. So smart companies, they let their employees build strong brands because they, in turn, become ambassadors for those companies. And it doesn't matter if you flip burgers somewhere or if you work in an office, everybody is an ambassador. And we see that also, especially in social media, that for example, if somebody does something which is maybe not seen as a positive thing, it will say, oh, and he or she worked at, or is a such and such, has such and such job at. And so it will be reflected upon everything that you do. So that's more about like conduct, but everybody needs to be an ambassador. And for gig workers and freelancing consultants, they need to be really proactive about communicating about what they do, how they do it, what is unique about what you're offering. And the key here is actually niche. Since there's so many gig workers and consultants that offer sort of the same thing, you need to be smart about finding your unique combination. And it can be marketing for sure, but maybe you can be specialized towards a special industry or even drill down even deeper into a specific part of an industry. And then you will be like the go-to person. So I think if I would only give one advice in terms of creating a brand around something, that would be it.
And that is something that cannot be underestimated. If you can get big by going small, Like you say, you become the big fish in a small pond and very recognizable for what you do. And that's what happened to me. I became the guy with the truck. So when people needed to move a bed, when they needed to move a big piece of furniture, they were always going on the platform, who's the guy with the truck? And it gave me the opportunity to brand myself on the site as the guy with the truck. And that, snowballed into more opportunities where I didn't focus on anything dealing with the car because those were lower paying opportunities. With the truck, I got bigger tips, bigger gigs, longer hauls that made it more worth my time by getting a smaller niche turned into a bigger opportunity. So you're right. We have to be focused on getting small enough where customers can realize that value that only you can bring within the market area that you want to serve. What are some of the biggest barriers or problems that gig workers face?
Well, I guess for most, it's financial insecurity. Of course, those who only have it as like something they do as a sideline, they're not as affected. But it's about financial exclusion in a way, because you're not, since you don't have a permanent job, and maybe you don't have, like in the US, you have the medical insurance part of this as well, which is always tied to permanent employment, which is difficult. It's different in other European countries compared to the US. So we have more healthcare provided. So that's not an issue there. But I guess that now with COVID, since we cannot ignore it, more people have been pushed into this space and in this insecurity. So some people either cannot move house because they got loans based on their previous job. So they still get to keep the mortgage they have. Unless they want to move, they will not get a new one. So a lot of people get stuck. Even middle class will get stuck, and maybe they even find themselves staying in relationships because for financial reasons, because they cannot afford to move along. So even if you have like a decent paying gig work, let's say flow of income from different assignments, you can still show the bank that you have enough money coming in, but they will still not entrust you with a new mortgage, for example. Or if you don't have a mortgage to start with, you are not like on the top of the list to get one. So I think this is something that I'm hoping will be solved thanks to AI that can foresee that you are going to be in high demand, that you have good ratings from the gig platforms and marketplaces, rate you as a trusted consultant or gig worker, that you have good references, that the services you offer are high in demand, and that can be connected either to doing remote work or that in the market you are in, there's a high demand for your top skill. So I think that a lot of good things are going to happen in connection to this, and that maybe we will see new ways of assessing credit scoring and so on. And I don't think that it will happen fast enough, but I think that's where we're headed. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Wow, my mind is racing. That's incredible. I mean, I'm thinking about players like AppJobs-institute that's helping to give workers a full-time schedule, even if it's made up of different companies,
Mm-hmm.
pushing that data to the new lenders who are doing exactly as you described, using these factors along with some form of AI to predict your future income and maybe even where you may have to work in order to get that income stream to qualify for a certain loan. So
Exactly.
the report may spit out, hey, Mark, your income will be six figures if you move 20 miles down the road, making yourself eligible for that income. And we predict that income will be stable for the next 5 to 10 years if you make that 20-mile drive to a place that's a little more fertile for your skill sets. And that would be the output of this new financial lending institution, which could have some really wild impacts on the way we work and live.
Mm-hmm.
That's really exciting. That really has me geeking out about, where this world can take you. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing I think could happen, and we're seeing it happen in places like Australia, it's this combination of fractional ownership of assets. Because the gig work is not as predictable, you have people coming together that don't even know each other buying a house together and having a fractional ownership of the house, where one person may own a bedroom, the other may own a bedroom, and they agree to share the public area. It's a different way of buying a home, but what it gives them is the opportunity to buy a really nice home in a good community, hold it for a while, let the value increase and sell it, and walk out with equity that then they may be able to use to buy their own home. So it's giving them a different path for managing that uncertainty by bundling the risks together. Even when there are people who you may not have a long-term relationship, you share the same goals. But this is really exciting to kind of think
Yeah.
how this could all play out. It means that we got to be ready to move at the drop of a hat if we want to participate in some of these types of lending changes.
Well, I think that the problem with the old banking system and how we are evaluated, they're so obsolete. And I think that also in a combination, they're not interested in changing either, because they're fat and happy, right? All the big companies, all the big banks, etc. They're fat and happy. They charge us for using the online banking services that we do all the work, but we still pay them to get access, right, to our accounts, which is just silly. Anyway, so I think this will be a revolution where all the people who thought that they were in an insecure space now will also understand how they can gain a more secure environment for themselves. Because I think it will be very intuitive for a gig worker to understand that how much more work they need to take on to actually qualify, what their turnover or salary amount needs to result in. So I think the most important part here is it will be a fair marketplace. And in my heart, since I have been an advocate for gig workers and consultants and freelancers in general all these years, I mean, I'm really hoping for this to happen in the next few years.
I think we're going to hit that tipping point, because that's the other side of the coin I wanted to discuss with you. Is what's going to be the biggest problems for companies as we move further into the gig and sharing economy. And if workers are as flexible as we're describing them, it appears to me the biggest problem is going to be retaining workers. And that's going to create opportunities for those gig workers, particularly those specialized gig workers who are in high demand. Companies have to figure something out if they're going to have predictable revenue. So they're going to have to, in my opinion, start paying to reserve your time, paying for you to be available even if you're not working, in order for them to have more predictability in their revenue, which is going to make the marketplace a lot fairer and give more benefits to those people who develop those unique skill sets as you described earlier. How do you see the problem? What do you see as the bigger problems that companies are going to face as this market evolves?
Well, I totally agree with everything you said. And in addition, I would like to add that I think that the challenge will vary a bit depending on the industry. But the war on talent, we mentioned it before, it's not going away. It will probably get worse long time before it ever gets better. And I think that moving forward, companies need to be open to another kind of salary package or compensation package, and maybe be open to sending an invoice instead of paying an actual salary, and have an acceptance that the employee or the freelancer gig worker themselves want to decide how they want to spend their money, how much they want to put into their own training, what hours they want to work, what kind of pension plan they want. Maybe they, like a lot of people that I know who are working in the gig economy space, they often actually choose to have a lower salary due to taxes and all of that, of course, because they want the salaries to last for a long time, right? But also because maybe you make this shift that you want to work less, or you want to make sure that you continue to develop from a personal point of view. And in terms of if you work within IT, for example, maybe you need new certificates in order to get new assignments if you're an IT consultant, for example. Or if you're in a totally different field, and training will help to strengthen the brand or the offering that you have. So I think that companies, both short-term and long-term, they need to be open about this. And I can just mention that in the consulting industry, this has been done for long time. And it's been consulting companies that have had like hybrid solutions for this. So they've given the consultants the opportunity to decide what the part of the revenue that they get to keep, what they want to spend it on. So the company, they keep a percentage, and then the employees, they get to decide how they want to split the money part. So if they want to buy like a new cell phone every 6 months, they pay for it themselves, for example. If they want to upgrade computers super often, so they pay through that same package as well. And for some people, well, maybe they want a higher salary and they're happy having a cell phone 2 years before they want to exchange it, then that's how it works. So this has been, at least in Europe, this has been going on for 10 to 20 years or longer in that industry. And in smaller consulting companies, you have like a different kind of dialogue with the founders of a company, and they will let you make these kinds of adjustments. But I think that this kind of thinking will move away from just being in the consulting industry to be applied by any employer, because they realize they need to. Otherwise, how are they going to attract the best talent?
Right. That type of unique thinking, I think, will take hold in all parts of this new economy. I've read of pilots that Amazon and Airbnb and ride-sharing companies have put out there that are truly cutting edge, in the sense that Airbnb, for example, will buy a home with you if you will agree to let them host people for 3 to 4 weeks out of every 6 months, or out of every 3 months. And if you let them send people there to share that room in that house, they will put up the money for the mortgage, opening up more opportunities for themselves and giving you the opportunity to get a home in a place where you probably couldn't get it. Or the same with some of the big car companies giving you a car if you agree to generate a revenue stream for delivering packages whenever there are opportunities within your zip code or within your region. So you have this service, this benefit that has a monetary value that gets connected to certain gigs that you have to agree to in order to keep that asset. So I think you're right. There's going to be so many different ways that companies are going to have to open up and try in order to retain that talent, which makes me wonder, are we on the beginnings of a type of a gig ecosystem where the value you create may never show up in your bank account, but it gives you access to all the things that you need? So I deliver that package. I know that by delivering 5 packages, that pays my utility bill for that month. I can host someone, and that's going to pay for my heating bill for that month. Different types of a full ecosystem that comes with gigs that allow for you to live and work wherever you want to be.
Like a barter system.
Right. That's built on their that's bolted to the gig economy, that has real value associated with it and may even have real currency, but it lets you have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah. I think that can work maybe in the US market, but in Europe, we have much higher taxes and really high taxes on work. So the salary tax is I mean, I could start to cry now, but I'm not going to, but it's really high. They, they take more than half if you have a decent salary, no joke.
Wow. Wow.
So if we would have a barter system in Scandinavia, they would tax it. So that would be a no-go for us. But I'm hoping you can do it in the US. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that would be
You can
wonderful.
be the ambassador.
I will get started on that
Yeah.
tomorrow. So tell me, what do you expect in terms of that question of an ecosystem? Do you see more collaborations between traditional companies and gig companies as we move into and out of the pandemic and into the new normal? Do you expect there to be more collaborations?
I think companies cannot afford not to be part of the space. And also in the ecosystem we now call the gig economy, the gig workers are actually in the center of it, because the gig workers as a group and also as a target group for services, the more this group grows, the more interesting it will be to offer services. So there's a strength in that. There's a strength in numbers, right?
Right.
So I think that's super interesting. And also, I think if we look at the gig companies who are in the space that enable the matching of gig workers with services and so on, I think that more companies will want to utilize all these services in this space because they can simplify their admin. They can get like smarter recruitment services thanks to this, and they can also gain access to gig workers that maybe would not have seen the job ad that company would post on their webpage, for example. And I think that the acquisition process of for staffing and for hiring consultants, I think that will also change. And like we talked about earlier about the 80-20 rule, I think we will see in more and more industries that they will see that there's a benefit to have more gig workers in an organization than they have in the past, where maybe it was a maximum of 20% of the workforce within a company. So I think that will be like the major change moving forward.
I am looking out 5 years into the future, and my co-host on the Gigging News segments, Eleanor Tucker and I, we have been recently talking about cooperatives and the technology that is being offered up to empower the gig worker to even challenge the technology companies. So the technology to run your own rideshare business as opposed to aligning yourself with Uber or Lyft. If that becomes the model going forward, that gig workers will use the platforms as a service and bypass the tech companies, I've tried to imagine what the world would look like 5 years from now if that trend takes hold.
Yeah, I think this has already started
Mm-hmm.
as a service. And especially like if you're not comfortable with the admin that you need to take on to start a company, you can use these gig platforms that offer this kind of admin services. So you can have like a pool of people for whatever sharing service you have. And then you will get like a kickback on whatever they make. So it's almost like multi-level marketing in a way. I don't want to use that name because that's like swearing
Right.
for a lot of people, for me,
Right.
for example. Yeah. But it sort of has the same kind of thinking, but it's simplified. And I think it's also risk-free because with all the admin you have to take on to start a company, you will not have to worry about the taxes. You will not worry about how people get paid because it's part of the system. So really interesting that you mentioned that. So I'm a true believer, and I think it will happen much faster.
Yeah, I do too. I think the big tech companies like Uber and Lyft, the big benefit that they provide is they make the market. They bring together both sides and match supply and demand, which means once you've kind of figured out the secret sauce, anyone that has a base can offer up this service to people looking to create micro companies. So I've looked out 5 years and I said, who are going to be the real competitors? And the first name that came to mind was Facebook. I was like, well, Facebook could give away free tools to help people run gig companies because they already have over 2 billion people on the platform. And that would be a terrific new revenue stream for them to offer these tools for running a business like a gig company and compete directly with Uber and Lyft and not have to do anything other than open up their front door to the billion people that you want to serve. That could create more equitable models for gig workers if Facebook were to do that. And it would certainly shake up the dynamic in terms of how you launch and grow a company if you were able to use certain social media platforms to tap into work the way we think of it in the gig economy. So I am very optimistic that we'll continue to see an evolution in the space and how the technology is used to help us live and work anywhere we want to work or live.
I agree.
Tell us now about your books. Let us get a 30-second rundown of what they'll find in the books that we mentioned, Working in the Gig Economy and Consulting in the Gig Economy, How to Get Great Gigs, those global editions. Tell us a little bit about those and tell us where we can buy those.
All right. So for starters, at Amazon is where you go. And my latest books is a book series that I have titled Great Gigs. So I'm sure I will write more books in this book series as well. And they are titled Working in the Gig Economy and Consulting in the Gig Economy. And I guess this is my contribution to inspire more people to actually take on both the challenge and also enjoy the opportunities in this space. So I try to explain what the market looks like and what you need to consider. We've talked about some of the things today in terms of how to get started, and also something about the personal brand, always important. I've also mentioned many resources for inspiration. I have actually your podcast as a suggestion for more knowledge. Yes.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, so lots of interesting resources and also lots of statistics about in order to understand the industry. But basically, it's a way of inspiring people to actually take the step and what to consider in terms of how you present yourself. And if you are into consulting, there are some specifics around that in how you create a great CV and talking about niche, that sort of thing. So there's a preview, so anyone can go onto Amazon and look up the books and then preview them to see the table of content, to see if it would be something for you.
We will make sure that we put links to all of Ms. Olson's books in the show notes so that you get a chance to go and take a look at them. Please do that. If you're interested in the gig economy, you need every resource that you can get, and these are some of the best resources available. So please check them out. We've been talking with Ms. Marianne Olson, a strategic advisor, a moderator, an author, a speaker, and this has been a wonderful discussion on the gig economy and the future of work. Ms. Olson, tell us where we can connect with you and find out more about your consulting practice and your books.
Well, first of all, I mentioned Amazon for the books and the book series. And also, I am happy to connect on LinkedIn. Just search for my name or Konsultboken, this funny Swedish word. You mentioned the book of consulting, yeah? So I'm high on the ranking if you type my name, so I'm easy to find. Also, I'm on Twitter, so I can also be found there. Marianne Mary is my tag there. Maybe we can put that in the notes, the links, so it will be easier to find. And also, I wanted to mention about the Great Gig series is In addition to the global editions that we're talking about today, I also have a special edition which is about the Swedish market. So if somebody who is gigging somewhere else in the world and want to learn about gig work in Sweden and want to do remote work, since it's a global marketplace, that could be interesting to read as well.
Well, we will put everything in the show notes, books, website, all those links will be there. Please check those out and make sure you learn a lot more about the gig economy before you jump in, because you want to make sure you're differentiated, that you focus on that niche, and that you get those great gigs, as Ms. Olson has just said. Ms. Olson, I want to thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
I want to thank Ms. Marianne Olson for coming on the podcast. This was fun. I geeked out several times during the podcast because we were talking about the future of how things might unravel. If you geeked out too, hit subscribe. Give us a comment. Like the episode and share it with a friend. That's going to help us beat those pesky algorithms and push us up in the rankings. What else do we have coming up on the Gigging Podcast? Well, you know we always have gigging news. Myself and Eleanor Tucker will be bringing you the top stories for this month in just another couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that. We also have some exciting interviews that we just can't wait to share with you. Awana Polog, she's in charge of partnerships with the appjobs-institute. You see, we mention them in almost every show. They're at the forefront of the gig sharing and platform economies, with more data, more information, and more analysis than more companies can even imagine. She's going to come on and talk about more of the exciting projects that great companies taking on. After that, we have Joseph Woodbury. I've mentioned him in a couple of shows. He's the CEO of Neighbor. Exciting interview with him as well. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, now is the time to do it so you don't miss these great episodes. If you like gigging everything in the sharing economy, you may like one of my other podcasts as well. Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare. That's a podcast for business mavericks. So if you're an entrepreneur or small business owner that views yourself as a David taking on Goliath, sees yourself as a business maverick, that might be the podcast for you. Or Career Coaching X's and O's. If you're a corporate exec that's not ready to dip your toe in the entrepreneurial pool, but instead has your eye on that corner office, that might be the podcast for you. All of these links will be in the show notes. Guys, I told you this all of last year, and I'll tell it to you this year. If you're not out there breaking something, your company might be the next thing that gets broken. Till next time, peace.